Now, I would love to bring up our next speakers. We have Nancy Cambron Perez, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager at Teladoc Health. Nancy is a scholar practitioner, HR thought leader, and diversity, equity, and inclusion champion with 9+ years of experience. Her drive is fueled by creating diversity recruitment and retention strategies, partnering with talent acquisition and learning and development teams, and reimagining the employee experience. Nancy comes to us from Teladoc Health, where she is currently the diversity, equity, and inclusion manager. Her role focuses on operationalizing a multi-year strategy designed to promote a culture of inclusion and belonging, attract talent, and leverage our business resource groups for business impact. All right, and she'll be joined in conversation with Jessica Padilla, or Padilla. I put my Argentine, I'm living in Argentina and I realized that I have to relearn Spanish. Spanish is not my first language. And so these like explaining everything with the accent in Argentina, I realized how different of a Spanish it is. But that's the beauty of how culturally diverse this diaspora is. So anyway, she'll be joined in conversation with Jessica Padilla, program coordinator at the University of Iowa Women's Resource and Action Center. So I'm happy to pass the mic to both of you.
Thank you for that kind introduction.
Yes, thank you. That was perfect. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Bienvenidos. Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month is not over. A reminder that it is continuously. I saw a post that said it's every month. So we're going to continue celebrating and uplifting our voices. So we're going to start with Nancy. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you are based, and give us an insight into your career journey? But before you answer, I do want to put a PS, call in terms of we happen to be matched to moderate, be a part of this program, and Nancy and I are actually sorority sisters. So shout out for anyone that knows about Sigma Lambda Gamma National Sorority. So I'm really happy to be able to be in this program with you, Nancy.
Thank you, Jessica. And it's nice to always see you both from a personal and professional lens. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So I am actually really excited. This is my first time sitting on the panel for Power to Fly. I've been an attendee of several of the events for a couple of years now, actually. So pretty excited to be sitting on the other side of the table. Happy to participate still and engaging in a different way. So I am currently the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program Manager for Teladoc Health. And actually, my journey was a little bit of a pivot. I started off in higher education, and I was, everyone gets into higher education because they want to make an impact. So I started working in higher education because I really wanted to make an impact in the student of color experience, first generation experience, low income student generation experience. And I think for me, it was a really great way for me to relate my passion, but also see the impact in the students that I was working with. So I started off working with undergraduate students, then working with graduate students, and then working professionals. And alongside that journey, I knew that at a certain point, I was actually really really increasing my passion and working specifically with working professionals and employee resource groups. So I started very slowly make a pivot away from higher education and into human resources because I saw that there was so much potential in growing and empowering our employees to make an impact, which is really what brought me to Teladoc Health. So when I first started, looking into positions and looking to pivot away from higher education, I really still wanted to make sure that I kept what was true to myself, which was working with organizations that make an impact. And I definitely saw that within Teladoc Health. I knew that there I would have colleagues that are focused on impacting in positive ways, really invested in our communities, and really wanted to continue to grow. So that's really what brought me to Teladoc Health. But I'm more than happy to answer questions for folks that are working in the healthcare space, trying to make a pivot, or even are still working in education. I always still, chat with some of my previous colleagues to talk about how we can continue to grow within all of those spaces.
Thank you for sharing with that. I'm definitely taking mental notes. We are definitely in interesting times in higher ed. And so there's always never, there's different ways for us to find our passions and continue to know that through networking and engagement with other people. So tell us a little bit more about your work at Teledoc and your kind of the passion that you found there. And then we kind of follow up in terms of like another question. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Teladoc Health is an organization that offers virtual healthcare solutions. And so amidst the ongoing pandemic, Teladoc Health really offered a safe and effective way for individuals to continue receiving clinical quality medical care without risking, without risking COVID in hospital or doctor's offices. So before and since and even after 2020, millions of people have still continued to turn to us every year to address their wide-ranging healthcare needs. So it can be from urgent care, they can be provided virtually, to ongoing mental health support, to helping individuals manage their chronic conditions and understanding treatment options when confronting something serious. And it's really been an opportunity for us, an opportunity and a responsibility to partner and empower individuals with the information that they need, the experience and the tools to make it easy to take care of their healthcare needs with confidence. In specific to my role, I am actually within our human resources department, and I was primarily hired to build and retain and engage our employees through business resource groups. So we're actually in a really unique situation. And I know folks, folks that are often coming to Power to Fly events, they're often business resource group leaders or advocates themselves. So I know they might be really familiar with some of what we're currently doing, but we actually grew our organization from 0 groups in 2021 to start to 7. So we now actually have 7 vibrant business resource groups within our community. And it was really a community-led effort and very much supported by our employees. So that really is a large part of my role, helping to maintain, provide metrics, and provide the framework of success for our business resource groups to make sure that we're retaining and engaging our employees. My organization before 2021 actually acquired Livongo, which is a fairly big organization as well. And so they were functioning, they had several diversity, equity, and inclusion councils. Some groups were formed, Teladoc Health had some groups. So when the merger happened, we kind of combined 2 cultures into one, and then really rethought about how we were going to move forward with new business resource groups. So that's the primary, that's one of the biggest aspects of my role.
Thank you for sharing that. There's definitely a lot of going on within HR in different companies, and everyone's doing it very differently, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about how virtual healthcare can erase the societal divide and make healthcare more accessible? For example, like what are some of the challenges in implementing virtual healthcare services, and how is Teledoc leading in this initiative?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So, I think specifically to our Latinx community, something that I always see that's really important to keep top of mind is that, our Latinx community is very loyal to our services. So we're often seeing providers, doctors, even businesses, we are very loyal. We stay with the ones that have continued to see us for years, because that's where we've built trust. That's where we've built really strong communication patterns. So I think for us, some of the challenges that we have seen, especially in the virtual healthcare space, is that it's still very much a new concept. And so it's really important for our organization to prioritize inclusive communication, building that trust within communities, and also helping them to navigate change. So we are already deeply committed to breaking down some of those barriers across some of the different, socioeconomic, demographics, and geographic groups to really make sure that everyone has equitable opportunities to obtain their full healthcare potential. So we're really working to make sure that we're increasing equitable access that is ongoing, and we're continuously striving for success. And so part of that is going back to those items, right, that I talked about. How are we building inclusive communication? How are we building that trust? And how are we helping folks navigate that change? And so our employees and our network of healthcare providers form an inclusive community. It helps to foster a healthcare environment that feels both safe and welcoming. So together they represent a diverse group of races, cultural backgrounds, nationalities, sexual orientations, and gender identity. So we make sure that our community's diversity reflects the diverse healthcare needs of those that we're serving. And this is really important. So we're continuously committed to extending the support and our goals of being compassionate and collaborative to make sure that the care that we want to execute is portraying that.
Definitely. It seems like there's a lot that's happening, and being able to kind of make that change, right? And that's sustainable. Can we touch base a little bit, about how the pandemic has affected the Latin Hispanic community, and with DEI awareness on the rise, what advice would you give to companies looking to diversify their workforce? How can we support the Latin Hispanic community in particular?
Yeah. Can you repeat your first question, Jessica?
Yeah.
I know you dived into two.
No worries. So kind of looking into, how has the pandemic affected our communities in the Latin Hispanic, and with the DI awareness that's happening on the rise, what advice would you give companies looking to diversify their workforce?
Yeah, so I'll start off with your first question, and then I'll move into the second one. So I think definitely during the pandemic, we saw that our Latinx communities, along with other communities of colors, were disproportionately affected, not only by COVID, but also by the economic fallout. The community accounted for a large percent of initial job loss due to pandemic, which definitely primarily even affected women of color within those within those communities. So we saw that while right now what we're seeing is that while many industries have started to reopen their doors, it's still in limited capacity, and our Latinx employment has not completely recovered. Even our Latinx college enrollment that was rising already before the pandemic was impacted by COVID. So students are now dropping out for various reasons, and we're seeing those reasons range, right? So it can either be from family members becoming sick and them having to primarily take responsibility for the household, to losing positions, to students once again having to support their families. But what I have seen has not changed is our values as a community, our commitment and the sense of resiliency in the Latinx spaces, to have a responsibility to care for one another. So I think there was definitely large economic and both pandemic consequences of COVID that we've seen in our community, and we're still, trying to recover. Now, when it comes to D&I awareness, and what advice I would primarily give to the workforce that are looking to diversify, I would definitely say that, and I think a lot of folks have heard this, but it's definitely a candidates market, right? Candidates are now looking for organizations that they can trust, that are going to focus on their career progression, their flexibility, and how they're going to be engaged, right? So while we saw that before the pandemic, there wasn't the need to have a hybrid workforce, we're going to see this continue to be a need of our candidates moving forward. So organizations have a responsibility to make sure that they're providing flexibility in those workspaces, and they're really making sure that, they're targeting what the candidate wants. So what I say to organizations right now is to really kind of take a look internally at what they're offering candidates that makes them stand out from competitors. So what exactly does career progression look like? Is it established out? Is there multiple stages? What are you offering in flexibility, and how are you engaging your employees? So what professional development opportunities are you offering? Do you have business research groups, employee research groups? Do you have community spaces where they can go and network, build internal and external community, but also do you provide them with opportunities to make an impact? I've seen candidates want to be more forward when it comes to having connections to senior leadership. They want mentorship opportunities. They want support in seeking out and making their own pivots, and even getting to know other industries and other departments. So making sure that we're providing those opportunities internally to make sure that we're continuing to not only retain the employees, but continuously engage them in this new hybrid workforce.
Thank you for sharing, Nancy. I know that I've been having similar conversations about, on our campus, how are we retaining our employees, our colleagues, because the job market is, is vast and there's open positions, but they're not being filled. And perhaps that's for a reason, right? And if we don't work on how to heal or work through and support our current employees, because those are also the ones that recruit. So if I hear about you having a great experience with Teledoc, I'm gonna be looking at LinkedIn and looking what jobs may be happening and, connecting, because, our community is very about, connecting with each other and word of mouth sometimes. And so it's really important of what is important to us and where the companies that are able to offer that to us.
No, that's really true. So definitely in the candidate experience and their process, to your point, if they have the ability to connect with internal employees, if they have the ability to hear from that firsthand experience of what it's like to view and be a part of the culture at Teledoc, then definitely having the chance to provide that, I think will, give them more opportunities to view themselves within the organization.
Definitely. It's definitely an ongoing, like you said, there's different ways of work and it works for different fields. And so it's like, how are companies implementing change before they're losing their people, right? To other competitive companies. So we'll get over to the next question. We have about 2 more. And so as an HR leader and DEI advocate, what are some of the resources and strategies you recommend other aspiring HR professional or DEI advocates to refer to?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So I think it's what I mentioned earlier during our conversation is that I personally made a pivot. So when I started off in higher education, once again, I knew I wanted to be in higher education because of that impact. I'm very much a mission-driven person, and I like to see that embedded in everything that I do. So for me, I had to kind of take a step back and reflect on what were the resources and skills I needed to build to help me make that pivot and help me make that change. So as somebody who started as a higher education professional, to help me become an HR leader and DE&I advocate, I did receive my master's that was in higher education, but a combination in social justice, which helped me in my diversity, equity, and inclusion capabilities. But now in terms of HR, I needed to look for not only professional development opportunities that put me within human resources departments, but also ones that provided me with the resources to build upon the skills that I needed. So what I actually did was I became a thought partner to our human resources department within our student affairs. And then I grew to actually working with the university as in their human resources departments and actually leading some of their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So I started off as a thought partner and then really stepped into a consulting space. I also made sure that I connected with other human resources organizations. I actually pivoted away from education for a little bit because I used to be very active in some of those spaces with those organizations. I pivoted away to focus more on opportunities that would expose me to networking, to network with individuals that were in corporate spaces, healthcare spaces, and other spaces that may not have been as familiar to me, but also that I could network from them and learn what they're currently doing in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also what it's like to work in some of those spaces. It looks very different than it does in higher education, and it's a much faster paced environment. And there's a strong emphasis on the business impact. So for me, having the ability to kind of step into those professional development organizations, having the ability to pivot away from what I was currently doing in education to organizations that were exposing me to skills that I needed to fill, not for the next position, but maybe even the 2 positions after that, was kind of what helped me with that pivot. I always tell folks, really look into organizations like Power to Fly that are going to expose you to a diverse group of colleagues, not just from one specific area, but from multiple ones. Look at the Hispanic Association for Career Enhancement. They were great advocates for me to exposing me into corporate spaces. I actually went back to go receive certifications in human resources to make sure that I also, knew the foundation of my new pivot. So that was really helpful to me. And I think one of the biggest things, as a Latinx community is that oftentimes we don't want to ask for help, but I did actually had to kind of I reflected and asked for help from fellow colleagues and then from fellow individuals that I met while networking to talk to them about how they made their pivot, how they grew within their careers. And I really took that time to reflect. My pivot actually, it didn't happen over a set period of time. It actually happened over years that I knew that I was growing in one area and that area was helping me grow in the next area. So I kind of followed that career progression to help me make that pivot away.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's definitely, I've been following you in different roles you've been in. I see you kind of like as a mentor in terms of things, we have like similarities and things, and being able to, like you said, ask for help. It can be difficult for any of us, right? And so sometimes we think that's like weakness and we have to figure it out on our own. But how will people know to support us or look out for opportunities for us if we're not voicing them, right? And there's a lot of people that want to support us and want to see us succeed, because they had, they struggled. There's people that are like, I was in your shoes at one point, so how can I help support you? And the people do the best that they can, right? And so there's, like Power to Fly is a great organization. I myself too have found resources that sometimes are not available in our own companies, right? And so that leads us to making connections outside even our state and globally. And so we have one more question. I know you talked in general about DEI awareness and for companies how to diversify their workforce, but one last question to solidify for our community. So especially, how can we support the Latin and Hispanic community in particular?
Yeah, so I definitely, for organizations that are looking to support and also how we can support our Latinx and Hispanic communities, I definitely say invest in your leaders. So oftentimes, what I've seen is that we lack the social capital to be able to move into spaces, which essentially means, how you're connected to individuals that can help expose you to the next opportunity or help even provide the next opportunity. So I always tell organizations to make sure you're investing in your Latinx leaders, because they're going to continue to grow and they're going to continue to invest back into those organizations the same way you're investing in them. So for folks that are continuing to grow within our Latinx spaces, I feel like we, focus as much as you do on your passion as you do on building your skill set. So, I moved my screen for a second. So focus as much on building your skill set as much as you're building your passion. Really look for what are the key things that you're going to need for your next role, your next position, or your next goal to make sure that you're able to target that. Really connect with individuals that may already be holding the position that you're looking for to see what helped them get there, to see what goals they have, to see what connected them to those spaces and how they were able to build out those skill set. For organizations, really look into career planning. Like, don't only look at entry to mid-level positions, but also how you're moving them along to senior executive C-suite roles, and making sure that the Latinx community is reflected in all areas of your organization.
Yeah, so it seems we have some questions from the chat. What are the focus points on Teledoc Diversity Strategic Plan? What benefits has Teledoc added or increased on for their employees?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So for us, diversity, equity, and inclusion is definitely still a journey. We're actually, and I'm going to invite everybody here, but we're actually looking for a vice president of inclusion. So we've recognized that we need to build out our team. We recognize that this is an area where we need to have continuous support, and DE&I has to be embedded not only in the employee experience, but in all aspects of our organization. So we are looking for a VP of inclusion to expand and actually grow out our strategic plan. And in terms of benefits that Teledoc has added or increased for our employees, going back to this year, we primarily focus on how we're engaging our employees. So we build out those community spaces with 7 resource groups, and our resource groups are targeting neurodiversity, multicultural awareness, courageous conversations. We actually have had the opportunity to host over 4 courageous conversations this year. And one of our biggest group actually has well over 500 employees. And so we're really making sure that not only are we targeting community and creating these spaces, but they're also collaborating with each other. We're focusing on intersectionality, because one individual may have multiple identities that they relate with, right? So we want to make sure that we're providing those spaces. And then going back, it's a journey for us. Like, it's going to be built out within this year. We're trying to start a foundation next year. And then the years after that, we have target points that we want to meet, which is why we're going to be expanding our team. Really great question.
So I think we're coming towards an end. You gave really great information, a little bit about yourself and Teledoc and some of the initiatives that are happening. How can people connect with you? Do you have a LinkedIn? If you're able to share that with us. But lastly, for everyone tuning in, how can we connect with you and support you in your endeavors? So make sure to use the chat. I know for me, I was attending one of these events and I was just really interested in how I could support this initiative of, supporting our women in the career fields. And this is why I'm moderating today after attending one of these events. So, never underestimate the chat in any events on Zoom. And so really great to connect with you again, Nancy. I will also put my LinkedIn in the chat. I'm always looking forward to connecting with other women, other people. I facilitate Women of Color programming series, the University of Iowa, and we've been doing some virtual programming. So I'm always looking for facilitators, and I just love networking, right? We are able to grow as we connect with more people outside of who we are, and we're able to kind of create in supportive spaces, right? We don't always, when we can't be in person, there's ways to continue that virtually. Yeah. And thank you to Power to Fly for allowing us to be a part of this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.